Good morning, everyone. My name is Margie Russell. I'm the Executive Director of NYARM, the New York Association of Realty Managers, but I also wear two hats. I'm an Executive Manager of Sales at United Metro Energy. And today, our topic is plumbing sign-offs, certifications, who can certify what, who can self-certify, and we're going to touch on practically every plumbing installation you can think of. Our panel today consists of Jaye Berger, an attorney who represents both building owners, managers, and contractors. George Bassolino III of George Bassolino Plumbing, and Vice President of the Master Plumbers Council of New York. And Dave Richards, a project manager for Ashokan Water Services. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to CJ with some opening remarks, and we'll take it away. Thank you.
So hi, everybody. How are you? So some of you may know me, some of you may not, but those who know me know I do a lot of work involving construction law in co-op and condo buildings in general, representing all sides of these transactions. So I come across lots of plumbing issues in the course of the work that I do. So I just want to start off with some general comments about things that occur, situations and stuff like that to get everybody thinking about this. And we've been talking a little bit amongst ourselves. They have prepared comments, and then maybe they'll address some of these things, and maybe you've been thinking about these things too. So I just want to reiterate, plumbing and electrical, you know, that's like the heart of everything on construction projects. And a really big thing, and it's probably going to get to be more of a big thing, is having adequate insurance on a project. And we were just talking about how the market is shrinking of carriers that are available to provide insurance for plumbing. And because I'm a lawyer and people come to me with problems, I know the worst examples of what could happen. And one of those examples is a leak that occurred and the plumber didn't have insurance. And you could say, but how could that happen? It was a very large project. My client happened to have been the general contractor. After the leak occurred and the damage was done, he goes through his file and he's like, oh my God, I don't have a certificate of insurance. And then I said, well, how did that happen? And he said, well, you know, I asked him for it and he said, I'll get back to you on that. And he never got back to me and I never asked. So, you know, it kind of sounds like a little bit of, you know, human error, but oh, what a problem. So insurance is a very important part of these things. When it comes to joining apartments, a lot of people are joining apartments these days. Plumbing is an essential element because there's plumbing that may need to be removed in order to show that it's been properly joined. So there you go with plumbing again. The adequacy of the plumbing, the situation I gave you where the guy didn't have insurance, there were pipes that had to be soldered together. I guess they didn't do it well enough and the soldering failed and it separated, yikes, separated and caused a three-floor flood, just like all over the place. So another issue involving plumbing, I'd like the speakers to maybe say a word or two about what happens if the plumber changes. You start the project off with a certain plumber, maybe there's a change for whatever reason, he quits, he's fired, whatever. What happens with the work that's been done? Who's going to certify it and make sure it passes inspection? And I know George and I spoke about that, so he'll definitely say something about that. So those are just some thoughts to start things off. I'm going to turn it over to George first, and I'll interrupt periodically with thoughts and questions.
Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right, also. Okay, there we go. All right, good morning. As Margie had stated, she wanted me to come in and talk about certifications and self-certifications. So what I figured I would do is I'll go into the beginning of what plumbing work requires a permit, and then what inspections would be required, and how you would do the certifications or self-certifications. What many people aren't aware of, there's two types of work that do not need a permit. One is called ordinary repairs, and the other one is called ordinary plumbing work. An ordinary repair is basically replacement of a fixture from the trap or the stop valves. Imagine changing a kitchen sink, where you just close the valves, shut off the water, and change the sink. You don't touch the trap and you don't touch the valves. That's an ordinary repair. It does not require a permit at all. Then you have ordinary plumbing work. That's work that a plumber will do, and instead of pulling a permit, he'll file a monthly report with the Department of Buildings. That report's called an OP 128, and he pays a certain fee per sheet. And some examples of work that you could do on that are replacement of a food waste grinder, replacement of a lead bend, replacement of a sump pump. If you have a 1 and 2 family house, you could change a boiler if it's less than 6 families residential zoning. So that's some of the work that you could do that doesn't require a permit also.
Can I ask, because it's a good moment to ask, how about if you're just changing the toilet? If you're changing the toilet?
The question was if you were changing the water closet, and that would come under ordinary repairs, because you're just changing the water closet. You'll shut the stop valve, and you could change a water closet. You do not need a permit for that. Okay. So that was instituted in 2008 when the code changed to give plumbers the ability to do repair work. You could change up to 10 feet of pipe. So if you have a waste line that's in the wall that's broken, what the code required before was to get a limited alteration application, which we'll talk about next. And then the pipe had to be inspected, so that meant the walls were open for an extended period of time. This permits you to do the repair and close up the wall. And what you're doing when you send that report in is you're certifying that work. The plumber certifies that work, that it's been done according to code. And it's the plumber's responsibility to ensure all the work was done properly. Does anybody have any questions on those first two things? Oh. No gas work can be done on that at all. No fire suppression work and no gas work can be done on an OP 128 as an ordinary repair. Yes, sir.
Okay, George, just 1 second.
Okay.
Any questions at the microphone, please? And if we could have a better volume on this. Here.
Alex Weiss. My question is, what type of plumbing work would require permit in 1 and 2 family dwellings?
For a 1 and 2 family, well, you could do any of this work without a permit. Anything that exceeds what's allowed to be done as an ordinary plumbing repair requires a work permit, which there's a limited alteration application, which we'll talk about next.
So it would be the same as commercial and 1 and 2 family, the same rule applies?
Right. That ordinary plumbing work encompasses 10 feet of pipe. It doesn't matter if it's in a commercial building, a residential building, 1 and 2 family house.
Thank you.
Okay. The next level of permit above that is what's called the limited alteration application. It had many names. It used to be called ARA, PRA, PRS, plumber repair slip. And basically, it changed in 2014. Prior to 2014, you had a limited amount of work stated by the name, and it was a dollar value of $25,000 per year per building. Now what they've done is they've categorized the work into 2 separate categories. They have Category 1, which is new work, and Category 2, which is basically repair work. What they've done is they've established a $35,000 limit on the Category 1 work, but no limit on the Category 2 work. So if you have a large building, that helps you out, because in some of these larger buildings, you can easily hit your cap right away. And then the next step, once you cannot utilize this LAA application anymore, is you had to go to a full all-2 filing, where you had to hire an architect or an engineer. So just to give you some examples of some things you could do, and this applies for fire suppression and plumbing and also oil burner work. So in sprinkler work, Category 1 is repair work, relocate or rearrange. But if you're replacing sprinkler heads, that'd be Category 2. So what that means, if you had to do some limited sprinkler work, you could use this limited alteration application up to a $35,000 limit. But if you're going to replace heads, and some buildings replace 400 or 500 heads, and that could go past the cap, there's no limit on the cap that'll be there. The fees are the same. They have a schedule of fees. For every dollar amount of work, you pay a certain fee to the building department. For plumbing, if it's Category 1 work, you used to only be able to add up to 2 fixtures. Now they've increased it. You can install up to 5 new fixtures in the building. You can install new fuel gas piping. You're allowed to take sprinkler heads off the domestic up to 5 heads. And in Category 2, which has unlimited cost, you can reroute piping, you can replace fixtures, you can relocate them, you can install your primary RPZ, you can do gas boilers up to 1 million BTUs, a burner up to 2,800,000 BTUs, and you can install a dryer. One thing I like to talk about dryers, many people have buildings with dryers. You cannot install a dryer on a limited alteration application unless it's a 1 and 2 family, 4 stories or less, and you have to file this limited alteration application, and it has to be done manually. So if you have a larger building and your dryer's put in, it would have to have a full filing, an all-to filing with an architect or an engineer doing that work. Does anybody have any questions on a limited alteration application? Yes, sir.
On the dryers that you just mentioned. Okay, I'm sorry. Question on the dryers. You just said that I could only file for 1 or 2 dryers, but if in a large laundry room, if it has a C of O, can I do an LAA?
No.
Also cannot.
No.
I still have to go through.
If you were going to replace dryers in a laundry room, you would potentially could do it on LAA. It'd have to be manual LAA, and it would have to be approved.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you would have to prove the C of O existed.
Correct. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Right. You mentioned that 5 sprinkler heads of domestic water service can be done. Now the question is, plumbing division requires a tap letter for just replacing or installation on domestic water service. Why they require tap letter?
They're not supposed to require a tap letter. I know what you're talking about in Manhattan. At one point, they were asking for that. And one of the things I do is I'm a plumbing sub-operations committee, and we address things like that. And we haven't gotten to the point where it's been official, but you do not need a tap letter to install 5 heads off of a domestic system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, back to me. All right, so you can see work that could be done without a permit and this limited alteration application, and then you have your full filing, your all 2 permits. So as the plumber's doing the work, he's going to need to do some inspections. They have 2 options, plumber, how they want to do their inspections. They can call for an actual inspection, which would be with a New York City inspector. And the New York City inspectors, very highly trained, very competent people. They'll come out, they'll conduct the inspection with the plumber. The other option is to do what's called a self-certification. The name's been changed now to an advanced notice inspection. The DOB recently, in December 7th of 2015, launched what they call Inspection Ready. It's a brand new system. It replaced BIS, and all your inspections are done through this new system. You request an inspection, you submit your results through Inspection Ready, and that's the new system. And instead of calling it a self-cert inspection now, they call it an advanced notice, but they mean the same, they're interchangeable. Now, this all started back in the late 80s and the early 90s in response to the fact there was not enough inspectors. At one point, there was only 9 New York City plumbing inspectors, and people just couldn't keep up with the volume. So they instituted the self-certification process. It's been around ever since. Now, when you want to do a self-certification inspection now, the plumber is the only one who can call for that inspection. He'll do it through make an advance notice through Inspection Ready. He has to give the city 48-hour notice, and the reason for that is that gives them enough time to be able to set up to check him. So a lot of people ask me, well, how do you know if you're doing a self-certification that the plumber's going to be honest? It's mandated in the system that the DOB has to spot check at least 20% of the inspections. So you could say you have a 20% chance that somebody's going to do that inspection. The people that do that are the plumbing enforcement unit. That's Sean Jones. He's the chief of that unit. And they come out and they'll spot check. So if you're doing an advance notice, self-certification, say I wanted to have it here. This is 20 West 44th, and I set it up for 10 o'clock today. I put in what inspection I was doing, say a water test or a gas test, and then I'd have to put the meeting place. I'd be responsible to be outside at the front door, if that's where I put as the meeting place, at 10 o'clock. and I have to stay here for the duration of my inspection. If it's from the half-hour inspection, I'd have to be here from 10 to 10:30. If I was doing a test with a gauge, that would have to be set up at 10 o'clock. So how this works is that the city has the right to come and check me between 10 and 10:30. Once 10:30 comes and my inspection is over, I can break down my test and I can leave. If the city comes and I'm not here, they're going to fail me for a no-show. When they come here, if they check me, they're going to check that I have the proper plans. The plans are the approved plans, and they're going to look at the job and make sure the job matches the approved plans. If I don't, I would fail. Advance notice inspections are pass-fail. You can't have anything wrong. You have to be 100% in order to do that. So if the inspector did come and I wasn't ready or I didn't have the proper plans, I would then fail, and I would lose my rights to self-certify this job anymore. Then I'd have to go back and I'd have to conduct an actual inspection. Doing an actual today, you could probably, in some boroughs, get an inspection in 72 hours, maybe 96, so that's between 3 to 4 days. So the window between the two is narrowed down a lot, and a lot of contractors are now preferring to go with an actual inspector. Because an actual inspector has some latitude. If he comes out and your plans have a little problem, he'll note it, he'll make a comment, and then it's called a condition. Some conditions are certifiable, minor little thing, you could certify it, send some paperwork in. Some the architect or engineer are gonna have to correct, maybe something with the plans or the Schedule B. And then you'll move on and you can conduct the rest of your inspections. But you got a little more latitude when you do an actual inspection. And a lot of people ask, well, if you do a self-cert, is that the same as doing an actual inspection? And it holds the same weight as an actual inspection. There is no difference. You can't say, well, self-certification is less and an actual inspection is more. It's the same. As a plumber, I have to sign and certify everything. If there's any problems, there's many things that they could do to discipline me. Every statement I have to sign personally, I have to seal it personally, and I'm certifying that everything is 100% on that job. Does anybody have any questions on this? Sure.
What is the difference between the master plumber who has the license and maybe his workers who don't?
Well, here's how that'll work. If I am doing an actual inspection, I can delegate anyone in my direct employ to meet the inspector. And he'll be delegated actually right in the system. I'll put his name in. So when the inspector comes, say my guy's name is Joe. When the inspector comes, he's going to ask for Joe. He'll meet Joe and he'll conduct the inspection. If I'm doing a self-certification inspection, I can send Joe to do every inspection except for one. That would be a gas test. I personally have to be on the site to conduct an advance notice self-certification gas test. And the other difference is, if I do an advance notice inspection, anyone I send, I have to give them what's called a letter of authorization. That'll be on my letterhead stating that Joe is in my direct employ working for me, and he's going to conduct the inspection. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just can I add to that?
Sure.
And does the same apply for the actual work itself? In other words, could Joe be doing all the work on the project and you're just coming by periodically to check?
Yes. As a licensed plumber, there's certain standards that have to be in place. Anyone that works for me has to be my direct employee, as evidenced by payroll records, and they're considered to be by that under my direct and continuing supervision. I'm allowed to have several layers of supervision, and that way I don't have to necessarily be on the job doing the work, but I am ultimately responsible for everything. I am responsible under the law and with my license. So yes, my men are trained, they do the work, but I'm responsible, and I have layers of supervision that those people will watch them.
Okay. With reference to questions, there's a microphone over there for those of you on that side of the room, and there's a remote. Angela, if you raise your hand, there's a remote microphone right here. And then Alex, I think you had a question.
Some plumbing work cannot be self-certified, such as underground plumbing work.
No, there's no work that cannot be self-certified. Everything could be self-certified. When it was originally done, the PPN only would exclude work that has to be certified by another agency, such as the DEP or the fire department. But any work can be self-certified. There's nothing that cannot be self-certified.
Administrative Code 2014, it says that underground piping work before it is covered should be advance notice, 48 hours as you stated, and if the building department plumbing inspector does not show up, then a special inspector can inspect the installation, but not licensed plumber. And my understanding is that that's what the administrative code states. And then within 24 hours, the special inspector must submit a statement and the results of his inspection to the building department.
Okay, I'll respectfully disagree. There's nothing that I can't self-certify. Underground plumbing, underground fuel gas, underground standpipe, that I can do self-certification. He did bring up a point. There's things called special inspectors, which you're aware of, and everything else you do in your building. Special inspectors haven't really gotten into plumbing yet. They're in fire suppression. Any all-two type fire suppression job has to have a special inspector. He's hired by the owner, so he's independent. There is provisions in the self-certification when the law came into place that people other than a plumber can conduct certain inspections. They were architects and engineers. Right now, and the reason I really bring this up is it's a big point of contention between the plumbing industry and the Department of Buildings, because the code is clear as to who can conduct tests. Only the plumber can conduct the test. And the code is clear that the plumber should be the one calling for the test. And the code also stipulates, both the fuel gas and the plumbing code, that anyone doing these tests is supposed to have 5 years' experience in doing this work. Okay? Originally, the only thing it prohibited, and persons prohibited from doing a gas test, is where they stated that 5 years' experience. And also, if an architect and engineer is going to do a gas test, they had to have general liability insurance, which most don't. So the question from the industry to the Department of Buildings was this: show us an architect or engineer that is on the list of having the 5 years' experience to conduct these tests. And they can't produce a list, so it's a point of contention right now. It is an option, that's what the code says, but it could be problematic, because if you have an architect and engineer and he doesn't have the proper experience, how is he going to conduct that test? Go ahead.
So we have special inspection agencies, and special inspector is usually a professional engineer, but he's accredited. He must be accredited with some national organization like a laboratory, testing laboratory, and he can have that accreditation and registered with the building department. Would that person be qualify for that? Witnessing the test or making the test? Actually witnessing, because the special inspector would not do the test, just witness the test. Would he qualify to witness a test?
In my opinion, the code's clear. You have to have 5 years' experience of witnessing a test, of doing it. So I don't know how anyone would get qualified if they weren't actually working for a plumber. Anyone that wants to become a licensed plumber would have to say, work for me for 7 years, and at some point they would go and get a journeyman registration, and then they'd go through a very comprehensive written and practical exam, and then a very thorough investigation by the Plumbing License Board. After that time, they'll be deemed to be qualified, and the city would issue them a license. So you could have a special inspector, and the fact that he's qualified may not exactly make him qualified to be inspecting the plumbing work. And we talk about gas. Gas is one thing which has the potential to be very dangerous if it's not installed by qualified people, properly inspected. But also drainage pipe, because you had mentioned about water leaks and drain. SARS killed 65 people 10 years ago, and it was all through defective drainage piping that was not properly installed. And you see how New York City is now. Everybody's renting out their spaces. People come from all over the world. You have all different kinds of germs and diseases, and without proper drainage piping and proper water piping, if the water piping is not put back properly, you have a leak, you could have mold. All of these things could cause problems. So people that work for me, they're under my direct continuing supervision. I'm responsible for them, and I'm responsible to make sure all the work's installed properly. So that's why we do it that way. Anybody have any questions so far on the self-certification? And self-certification is a privilege for a plumber. It's not a right. So if we have a problem, we can eventually end up losing our self-certification privileges and not be able to do it anymore. So that's to do the actual inspection. Some things changed now when they went over to this new system with Inspection Ready. Before, we had to do some more field inspections. We'll talk about gas. There's 4 inspections for gas. You have a gas rough, a gas test, a gas finish, and then gas authorization. And what they mean is that gas rough is simply looking at the pipe, making sure the pipe is installed in a code-compliant manner, it's not in a prohibited location, that there's sleeves through the wall, proper fire stopping. So that's what's the roughing inspection. It's a visual inspection. Then you have the gas test. Depending on the pressure in the pipe, there's 4 different test pressures and durations that you might have. So the plumber can do a self-certification or an actual inspection. Those are 2 tests. Those cannot be certified. What certified means is you are just certifying that something is okay, and I'll get into that now. The 3rd inspection we talked about is the gas finish. When you put in for a gas finish, what you're saying is that the gas pipe's connected to a meter on one side, it's connected to the appliance on the other side, everything is finished, and it's ready to be turned on. That's the finish inspection. Once a plumber completes those 3 inspections, rough, test, and finish, then they can request gas authorization. Now, a new change in this inspection ready system is that they're stating that an owner can also request gas authorization through the system. In order for them to do that, they have to be delegated. They don't call them jobs or permits now, they call them records. So if the record for this job, let's say 20 West 44th, and you're the owner and you want it to be delegated, you'd see everything that's going on with your job, when I request an inspection, when I conducted an inspection, and my results. Now, the 4th step for me is the gas authorization. I've done my roughing inspection, the pipe's okay, the test, pressure test is fine, finished, we're ready to go. Now we're going to request authorization. And once authorization is granted, I would contact the utility, they would come out, they would conduct their own visual inspection. If everything is okay, they'll dispatch a crew to come out and establish gas into the piping. So those are all the steps. Out of those inspections, I have to come out in the field to do the rough and the test. The gas finish I can do from my office, and I submit for a gas finish. It just goes right through. As fast as I could type, in 5 minutes, I pass my finish inspection. And I request gas authorization also from my desk. I can request gas authorization. I have that option, or if I was doing an actual inspection and I brought an actual inspector out and I was 100% ready to go, I can have him do the rough, the test, the finish, and give me authorization from the field. That's another option. So that's how that process goes. And there's a lot of other inspections that I could certify. If you're doing waste piping, I have to do the same thing for waste pipe. I have to do a roughing inspection. There's other inspections that I could certify, such as the finish. That means everything's finished, the fixtures are set, I certify my finish, and then once all of that's done, I could do apply for my C of O. So those I just do. There's not an actual inspection when the time is right. There's storm drain finish, there's water sanitary finish. Cap and remove. You talked about combining apartments. You take apartment A and apartment B and you're going to combine them. Well, you know what? We had a bathroom here. We're not going to have it anymore. So we do what's called the engineer will file a cap and remove. And then I would certify piping capped and removed according to code. And I just want to back up to one thing. We talked about self-certification, but I want to talk about 2 other important things the Plumbing Enforcement Unit does. Besides spot check plumbers, they audit. And they do audits on a lot of life safety stuff, which is considered fire suppression and plumbing. So they'll come out and look at jobs that are completed, maybe a year or 2 later, to make sure that everything's in compliance, that the engineer filed everything properly, the job matches the plans. And if there's a problem with it, what they'll do is they'll issue an ECB violation and they'll bring everybody in. If the plumber didn't comply, he'll maybe go to BSIU, which is the disciplinary unit. And the same thing for an architect and engineer, they can refer them to the state to charges if they didn't comply. So that's another important thing they do. And they also answer complaints. Today, if you dial 311 and you say, hey, there's plumbing work going on in this building and there's no permit, probably by the end of the day, somebody's going to come here, an inspector, and generally it's from the Plumbing Enforcement Unit, and they're going to look. If they see plumbing work going on and there's no permit, they're going to issue an ECB violation. So if you're managing a building, you want to make sure that you have a permit in place. Generally, if the plumber's there, they'll issue him the violation in his name, but if not, they're going to issue it to the building for work without a permit. It's $5,000 now, could be up to $25,000, and in July 1st, the penalties for work without a permit are going to quadruple. So it's important to make sure you have a permit, and now you have an understanding of what you need a permit for and what you don't. Sure.
I thought you said a minute ago that in some instances the owner could be asking for the inspection. And if that's true, why would the owner be doing that rather than the plumber?
Well, in my opinion, the owner could not call for an inspection. And you wouldn't be able to do an advance notice, which is a self-cert. According to the DOB, in some instances, the owner can ask for an inspection through inspection ready if they're delegated to the job. But here's the problem. If I'm the plumber and I'm not ready, I'm not going to go, you're not going to pass the inspection. So we don't know why they put that in the system, but it is in the system now.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't really make sense because it's kind of like they're trying to go around you.
Yes. If they're trying to go around me, maybe I'm not performing fast enough, and then we'll talk about what happens if you're not happy with my services, what we would do. But they have put it in that owners can call for some sort. You can't actually call. You'd have to be delegated to the job, go in the record, and you would have to ask for an inspection. But you'd have to know what inspection that you're asking for. Okay. When the inspector comes up and he sees somebody delegated there, he's looking for the plumber, especially if it's doing a gas test or some kind of other test. They want you to be there. Okay. Does that answer your question? Oh, yes.
Some piping work, gas piping work prior to testing requires a pipe purge. And what is the practical approach for piping that requires purging?
Well, purging would not be done on a new pipe. It would only be done on an existing pipe prior to establishment of gas. And there's a whole section in the code, like it's 409, on the purging procedures you would have to follow.
It should be purged to outdoors, like 2.5-inch pipe and larger size and certain length.
Right. It depends on the length and the size, and then you'd have to purge with an inert gas like nitrogen before they would establish gas.
So it's prior to the test.
Not prior to the test, prior to establishment of gas.
Prior to establishing.
Yes.
And that when you have in a city, right? Some restaurants, everything, they don't have backyard septic. So do we need to purge it to outdoors on the sidewalk?
It's complicated, that purging, and generally the utility is going to be the one that does that.
Okay, there should be certain safety precautions
Right.
should be
Utilities,
in place.
specially trained, they have a leak detector to measure the amount of air and gas ratio, and they'll do the purging.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
How rigorous is the disciplining of licensed plumbers who have perhaps certified something that should not have been certified?
Unfortunately, it's too rare. That's one of our biggest problems today is the amount of unqualified work, and in many cases, it's covered up by a licensed plumber. We find that all too often, and that is very dangerous because you really don't know who's doing your plumbing. You really don't know if you're going to have a problem, if you're going to be insured, because your GC is not your plumber. He shouldn't be doing your plumbing. The guy, if you look at your permit and it's Bassolino, then Bassolino should be the guy on the job with his men. If it's not, it's probably it's probably problematic for you. That's not legal. What they'll do, if you get in trouble, they'll bring you before, they call it building a special investigative unit. It's tied in with the Department of Investigation. And if I self-certify stuff, it's a false document. Minimum penalty for me would be a 6-month probation, $7,500 fine, minimum. And in my case, it's supposed to be willful, but you can make a mistake, but it doesn't really matter. If I make a mistake, it's my responsibility. Everything I sign, I'm guaranteeing that it's 100%.
Just a comment. I had a blatant, very straightforward issue, and I spoke to the licensed plumber, and I suggested that perhaps he should be concerned about his license, and he wasn't concerned at all.
Well, I would just like to make a comment about that with the 2nd Avenue incident. That wasn't a licensed plumber on that job that did that work. It was an unqualified individual who's now facing manslaughter charges. If that was a licensed plumber, those would have been much more upgraded charges. And you got to be concerned, because if you put a piece of pipe in or your employees do it, you're responsible. If they do it negligently and something happens, Anything can happen. And losing your business might be the least of your problems. So,
I'm an insurance professional, Chris Weisbecker with USI Insurance. Just one thing is excluded from most building owners' general liability policies is any work in your building. If you have somebody do any work directly and there is an error, you have no coverage whatsoever coming from your insurance. Just a FYI.
last year, right across the river, the condo people were having their maintenance guys repair something. They burned down 400 apartments. And they didn't know, they had no fire safety training, they didn't have a fire extinguisher. They tried to call their boss instead of calling the fire department. So I don't know how that's going to work out insurance-wise, but that's a problem. Okay. Any more questions on what we've covered so far? We talked a little bit about combining apartments. We talked about leaks. You shouldn't leave leaks go. You can get mold. Drainage piping, how important it is.
What if there's some sort of falling out with the initial plumber,
Okay.
and you need to hire somebody else? How does that transition occur?
Okay, it's relatively easy. If I'm working for you and you're not satisfied with the way I'm doing the job, you would just fire me, deal with it contractually, and you would hire another plumber. What the plumber would do, if the permit is still active, he would supersede me. So basically, Bassolino out, Smith in. Now, Smith is your plumber. What happens with the work that's installed already? If it hasn't been inspected, it would have to be inspected. So if your walls are closed up, you would have to open your walls. But your walls should not be closed up because I would have been responsible. The code is clear. When I have to call for a roughing inspection, it's my responsibility to have the walls open. It's my responsibility to make sure they remain open until that inspection is passed. So that's another thing you might want to, make sure before you have a contract to close your walls up, that you at least pass your roughing inspection. So you fire me, you're not happy with me, you just have somebody supersede me. Now that's your new plumber, and he could finish the job, conduct the inspections, and get the sign off. It's pretty much that simple. I don't have any rights as far as the building department to hold on to being the plumber of record for the job. The Department of Buildings does not put any emphasis on money. It's all about safety. So if I have a money or a contractual problem with you, they don't care. What's important to them is to make sure the job is done, installed properly, inspected, and everything is safe. So that's why they'll allow you just to fire me and hire another plumber.
George, so no, the first plumber doesn't need to sign off. The second plumber can just supersede.
Yeah, the second one can supersede. But again, you might want to just make a review to make sure that the first plumber is everywhere he needs to be with his inspections. If the walls are closed, that's where you could have a problem.
George, on that topic, so when the next plumber comes in, presuming he goes through that check, that overlap of cost, you have to be prepared. Obviously, the building is prepared to take on additional costs because, let's say the job is for $250,000, and you're not going to get that job if you've had two plumbers and there had to be some overlap. So, right, I mean...
Well, that could happen, and in many cases, I've never been on a job where I was ahead. So I wouldn't know about that. Usually I'm behind, and the owner would actually maybe make money doing that. But it all depends. You have to consider all of those things. What I would do, honestly, if I was going to take over a job that somebody was removed, I'd call them up and I would ask them, what was the problem? Was it a problem between the owner and you? Was the owner not paying you? Or did you have a problem? Or was the guy maybe just a jerk, and then you don't care, you'll take the job over. I do that personally as a courtesy.
Okay, but if you're going to end up signing off on the entire job, and part of the job someone else's employees have already done, I mean, you've got to go through it and massage it to an extent.
Well, what I would do is I'd review the job. I'm going to contractually limit my liability to any work that's installed. I'm not going to guarantee his work. But as long as it's code compliant, if it's been inspected, that's fine. If it hasn't been inspected, I'll make sure it's code compliant, and we would move on from there. Okay,
so the magic word is not guaranteeing it. So part of that work won't be guaranteed by you. So that would be an issue to consider.
That could be an issue, because I really wouldn't want to guarantee something that I didn't install, especially if it was closed in a wall. It'd be very hard for me to do that.
Okay, so what's an owner to do
That's the thing, it's a very delicate thing, you know, when people cavalierly say, I'll get rid of him and I'll get somebody else, this is exactly the problem. Because things may have been sealed over, someone else may be reluctant to sort of bless the prior person's work. So it's a problem, you gotta maintain good relationships.
Yeah, it's very hard, even if I look at a pipe to tell, all right, is this going to break in 5 years? No, you know, I mean, if it was a little, you could tell by the work, if it was professional workmanship-like manner, all right, you'll say, you know, we have a good thing. But if it's all very sloppy and not properly supported, not properly installed, then, you know, bring it up. And then, you know, give the owner definitely a recommendation or options. You know, this is what I think, and we would go from there. We could test the pipe. If it's a water pipe, we could test it, so we'll know that it's okay. Drainage pipe we could test.
I mean, if you're the superseding plumber, it's kind of like it or not, you are basically blessing the other person's work, because at the end of the day, you're the person who's there certifying it. So nobody knows you did up to here and the other person did up to there. So you have to be careful about that work.
Yeah, as a contractor, 'cause my insurance company is going to want to know where I started and where I went on to. So
Right.
Personally, I would definitely, you know, put that in my contract.
Okay, so, and this would apply with most contracting jobs. So for an owner who manages their own building is willing to take on that risk of knowing that part of the job is not going to be guaranteed. It may be certified from the building department standpoint, but it's not going to be guaranteed from a business standpoint. But for a co-op building manager, that board, if something went wrong and down the road they find out, you mean that part of the job wasn't guaranteed, so these are...
Well, you know, in the alteration agreement, if that's what we're talking about, a co-op building, the shareholder is still responsible for everything.
Right.
So if down the road something failed, they're going to be getting in touch with you. But that's always true when there's any kind of change in who's doing the work. Like if you got rid of the general contractor and you hire another general contractor,
Right.
you got all kinds of work that person had been involved with, and now you're getting somebody new and the guarantee is not applying.
Right, and so, but you mentioned if it's a shareholder or unit owner work, but if it's the building engaged work, you know, a new riser or what, so that property manager has to think very clearly or choose most wisely, is obviously choose most wisely beforehand.
Be careful about what your motivation is for letting the person go. Like George said, he would make a phone call and say, why the transition? Is it just, you know, because he's not paying you, he's a jerk or whatever?
Right.
So find out if it's a really good reason.
Right, exactly.
You know, as an owner, you already know, I'm sorry, if you, for whatever reason you fired the guy for, if he was not showing up, if his work was sloppy, he was failing inspections, you're probably going to have a problem, and you might want to consider to redo the job up to a point.
You've seen litigation on this. I mean, is it advisable to have the owner actually place this into the contract with the new finishing contractor?
Place what in, though? You mean
Just
making that
specific-
person guarantee the work?
Not guarantee the work, but it's almost specifying at what point they're picking up on the project and in detail.
To the extent that you can articulate what that magic point is, I guess you could. It's just, it's kind of hard to do.
Right.
You know, even when I litigate, you know, and people are trying to say, but the first contractor is the one who did it. I even had a case where the theme of the case was the nails were shiny. The reason they said, oh, it's his work is they were shiny new nails, which meant the other guy couldn't have done it. It's really hard to say where one ends and the other picks
begins.
up, which is why sometimes it could be what George said, that you might have to redo work, you know, and put something in again to make sure it's done right the way I wanted to have it done if you're the second plumber.
Yeah, we could always test it. Whatever the system is, it could be retested, and you can get an idea. If you see a lot of leaks, say, you know, it's a problem.
I mean, someone came to me recently, there was something that wasn't connected tight enough, and it resulted in a really big flood and a lot of damage, and apparently the plumber said, oh yeah, I could have tightened it a little bit more. That's like a really big deal, you know?
Just a couple more things. If I supersede, if you had a permit and it's been inactive for up to 2 years, you can renew it, just pay a small fee. If it's beyond 2 years, you would have to get it reinstated, and you're going to pay the full permit fees, and you have to get permission to reinstate it. Also, as far as tests, all the inspections are going to be okay, I would be able to assume, except for one. If you did a gas test and it passed and it's more than 1 year old, I'd have to do another gas test. Other than that, the other inspections would be okay. Any questions? Oh, good then.
Okay, great. So let's have our next speaker come up and prepare some questions for him, and then we'll take more questions from the audience.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Thursday to everybody. My name is Dave Richards. I'm with Ashokan Water Service in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And my focus this morning is going to be much more narrow. I'm here to talk to you about the very complex and challenging landscape of backflow prevention, government-mandated backflow prevention. So when we talk about backflow, the first thing that comes to mind is sewage backflow. We all remember when Sandy blew through our city several years ago, the low-lying areas of our city, the areas near the coast, were inundated with massive storm surge that entered our sewer systems. They were not designed to handle such massive amounts of water, and that water had only one place to go. It bubbled up through toilets and bathtubs and sinks in our homes and did lots of damage and caused a lot of health problems. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about backflow from what's inside your building back into our domestic supply. And this must be protected. And how does this backflow happen? Well, it's the simple laws of physics. The water supply that we get in our city mains is generally under a very constant pressure. So it's constantly flowing, you're using it, more water is coming into the building, but it acts like a gate, a barrier almost, and it prevents any water from the building from going back out into the domestic water flow. What happens in a water main break, or somebody is hot during the summer and they open up a fire hydrant, or there is a fire in the neighborhood, God forbid, or a car careens out of control and slams into a fire hydrant, is that water pressure now in that main drops. And that drop in water pressure now will allow and call for siphoning. It literally sucks or vacuums the water that's already inside your building back into our drinking water supply. That can be very dangerous. Another way backflow can occur is through back pressure. Most folks know that normal city water main pressure will get water to go up to about the 6th floor. If you have a 15 or 20-story building, you need booster pumps, water booster pumps that's going to push that water higher. Those booster pumps generate 100 plus PSI of pressure, 140, 150, and when that higher water pressure is faced with that lower supply pressure, it overwhelms that lower pressure and pushes the water that's inside your buildings back into our domestic water supply. So what's bad about that? It's clean drinking water. Well, inside of our homes and our properties are boilers. Inside of those boilers is rust or chemical retardants to prevent rust. We have laundry rooms, washing machines, so there's detergent and surfactants and bleach. None of us want to have to drink that stuff. We have to make sure that it does not get back into our water supply. So some very, very brilliant engineers many years ago came up with a design for backflow preventers. Backflow preventers take on two forms. There's a double check valve and a reduced pressure zone, an RPZ. A double check valve has two valves that shut automatically, once it senses the change in pressure, those valves shut and it stops the water from inside the buildings from getting back into our drinking water. A reduced pressure zone has a third valve. So if your building has objectionable water inside it, like rusty water or swimming pool water or laundry water, you could probably just get away with a double check valve, but if there's other things that could be dangerous, like chlorine in a swimming pool, chemicals in a boiler, you will most likely need an RPZ, which would be an extra valve that would help you prevent that backflow. Now, again, we talked about plumbing cross connections. Water hoses are major sources of plumbing cross connections. You put water inside of a wading pool or a swimming pool at your home. That hose is in the water supply itself. If there's a water main break outside or a car careens and knocks over a hydrant, that's going to start back siphoning, and that water is just going to flow right back into our water supply. There are case histories of folks showering with hydrochloric acid. That's a horrible concept, and I'm not looking to scare anyone, but these are chemical plants that didn't have the right backflow preventers on them, and sure enough, a disaster occurred and people got hurt from it. So that's why the government mandates that landlords, owners, managers install backflow preventers right after the water mains that come into your building. So you might have one domestic supply main, you would probably just need one backflow preventer. If you have two, one for your water sprinkler system, you're going to need three. One for the domestic supply and two for your fire sprinkler supply system. These preventers take on two forms. The primary backflow preventer protects the perimeter of your buildings, preventing any water from inside that building from going into our precious drinking water. Secondary or internal backflow preventers help protect the tenants inside that building from cross-connection backflow into the current water supply that exists in those buildings. It's important to know the difference, and it's important to know who regulates them. The primary backflows are regulated by New York City DEP. Secondary internal preventers are regulated by New York City DOB. DEP mandates annual testing of backflow preventers because they have moving parts inside, springs, plastic poppets. They can actually wear out over time. They can get filled with buildup and other particulates that exist in our water supply, including sand, mud, pebbles, rocks. We pulled out a baseball-sized rock from a 6-inch backflow preventer just a few months ago. You'd be surprised what's in our domestic water supply. But that stuff generally sinks to the bottom of the water main, but it does invariably get pushed along, and it ends up at the first plumbing connection inside, which right after the water meter would be the backflow preventer. So it's very, very, very important to test. If you looked at your handout, you'd see exactly what these devices look like, the RPZs, the DCVs. I'm sure you've seen them inside the building. These are the devices we're talking about. And you really need to understand and embrace the process, we believe, to manage your risk by eliminating your liability. And when we talk about liability, you should know that every building in New York City is mandated to have a backflow preventer installed. If there's a breach in the external or the internal water supply that could create backflow, you may be facing unlimited liability. Very, very important to know that. If you have a backflow preventer installed and it breaks, it is your responsibility to know that it's malfunctioning, and you must repair it to keep your liability as low as possible. If you have a backflow preventer installed in your property that is not properly registered with DEP, or it wasn't installed properly according to plumbing code, New York City plumbing code, you might have some unlimited liability there. So it's important to know that, and it's important to check it, and it's important to give yourself and your tenants peace of mind. There are 8 steps to install a backflow preventer in this city, and you must go through all 8 steps. You can't skip any of the steps in the process. You must have a professional engineer draft plans, or a registered architect draft installation plans for the backflow preventers. Those plans must be sent to New York City DEP and reviewed by a DEP engineer to make sure that it fits exactly what their codes and requirements are. The first step is to have an inspection of the property to find out exactly what's inside the building. Is it objectionable, which would require a DCV? Is it dangerous, which would require an RPZ? Or can you actually file for an exemption? Because perhaps you don't have any problems inside that building that would call for the need of a backflow preventer. Exemptions are rare, but they do happen. We've seen them. So know that that could be a possibility that you should explore. Once the architect drafts the plans, it's sent to DEP. If they accept the plans back, then it comes back to the master licensed plumber for installation. They have to pull a work permit from the DOB to install that backflow preventer. And once the installation is completed, the engineer or the registered architect is supposed to inspect the installation to make sure it was installed according to code and according to the plans. Next, the licensed plumber has to sign off on the job to make sure that it was installed correctly, and a certified, New York State certified backflow tester must test that device while it is not in service. It must be charged, but the shutoff valve has to be closed without any downstream demand, and that device must pass testing. Once it does, then the MLP will fill out a Gen 215B, an initial test for the New York City DEP. It's a form that must go to DEP. It must be signed, sealed by both the architect, the engineer, the plumber, and the certified tester. And if it is accepted by DEP, then you now have a legally registered device that must be tested every single year by a certified backflow tester. Yes?
Is this type of work a subspecialty of plumbing?
It
or
is.
Specialty in and of itself?
No, I think it's a subspecialty of plumbing.
So, oh, I'm sorry. I asked if it was a subspecialty of plumbing, and he said that it was. So would all plumbers do this, or not all plumbers do it, and there are people like yourself who just specialize in doing it?
I think many plumbers do it, all plumbers do it, but it is required that a master licensed plumber actually inspects the job and signs off on the job. Now, he or she can certify that they are or are not the plumber of record, but their inspection must certify that it meets code and it was done according to plans.
So would all plumbers offer this service?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
But again, these devices range in size from half-inch up to 12-inch. The 10, 12-inch devices, they can weigh thousands of pounds, so it really takes a specialty.
Well, that's what I'm trying to ask. So in other words, if you had a bigger building that needed this, you'd want to go to more of a boutique kind of company
Absolutely.
like yours that does a lot of this stuff and large ones.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay.
True. Okay, so once that, as I said, the Gen 215 is approved by New York City DEP, you get that Gen back from DEP, and a copy should be sent to the owner so that they have it for their building, for their records. If it's an internal device, that internal device also needs to be inspected annually, but it does not have to be filed with New York City DEP. It is simply OP129 is maintained inside the building so that if a DOB inspector comes down and wants to see if you've been maintaining those devices properly, you have those records at hand. And as far as annual testing is concerned, as I said, many times these backflow preventers fail. About 5% of the tests we do, and we do about 2,000 tests annually in this city, 5% fail, and when we open them up, you would not believe what we find. I mean, it can get pretty horrific with the buildup, and you could see very, very easily why these devices fail. They just simply, in most cases, need to be cleaned. The rubber gaskets need to be replaced and properly serviced, and then the device is then reassembled and closed. It is tested, and as long as it passes testing, you're as good as gold.
Question. So is there like a maintenance program for these kinds of things? Like every 3 years you should have it cleaned or whatever?
Well, annually you must test it, and it must pass. And then if it fails testing, it must be repaired within 30 days. That's DEP mandate. However, the DEP has a recommendation, and they do ask that everybody overhaul their devices every 5 years. It is not a requirement. It is right now just simply a recommendation.
So when you say you open it up and you can't believe all the buildup, that's normal buildup you'd have on an annual basis?
Yes, yes, and many parts of the city have more buildup than others. I think the most northern parts of the city where the water is coming in from the reservoirs are more prone to see that up in the Bronx, northern Queens, northern Manhattan, of course. In Brooklyn, lower-lying areas of Queens, more southern areas of Queens, you don't see that as much. Okay. Yes?
We operate laundry rooms in the co-op buildings. Is a PZ valve required for the laundry room only, for the washers and dryers?
I'm
Or
sorry, is the what?
Is the PZ valve required for the laundry room only, or main valve for the building itself?
No,
On the
you
main?
should, again, for a laundry room, you would want to protect the facility from any backflow from that laundry room, so it would require that you install a double check valve, a DCV.
Okay, so is that the code, or I just want to protect it? Is that a choice, or it's a code, Department of Buildings code?
It depends on how much you want to manage your liability, in our opinion. So again, if there was backflow into your building that your tenants had to suffer through, it might be wise to make sure that that cannot happen. So it would be wise to install them.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Okay. Is it building department required to have the backflow device in laundry rooms as opposed to good business practice?
Well, code requires you protect against backflow. So if you had a laundry room, you would have to protect against backflow. But what you have to understand is the code is a new construction code. So if you were doing a new laundry room, you would have to do it. Most of these things do not retroactively apply. Okay. Most washing machines, they have protection through what's called an air gap, that the water could not get back into the pipe. But some machines may not have an air gap, and then this RPZ installation would protect the tenants in the building. So generally, it is not a retroactive requirement. It's something the board may want to have someone like this gentleman come in and make an assessment. But the code does state you have to protect against backflow.
Does your typical annual inspection that your company does for a client include inspection and cleaning? No, it doesn't. Only if the device does not fail testing, there's no need to open it up. So.
Okay, hold on, just for the mic. Sir, for the mic.
Oh, absolutely, sure, certainly. Yeah. And we have clients that ask us all the time, look, it's been a while, it's been 2 years since it's been opened up, or they've passed it. We'd like to have them cleaned and serviced. We can certainly absolutely do that.
Is there a significant difference in the cost?
Well, it's time and labor. That's the difference. A backflow test takes less than 10 minutes. You have to shut off the building water, test the device, and then restore. Once you have to disassemble the device, it's time and materials. Exactly.
Okay. Alex, you want to, and Steve, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, no. DEP accepted in the past backflow double check valve for coin-operated laundromats or laundries in residential buildings. Now, lately, the DEP would like to have RPZ for coin-operated laundry machine. Is that true?
I believe it is.
Okay, so laundry, if multiple dwelling has a laundry machine coin-operated, then RPZ device.
RPZ is required.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Steve Nathan.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. I heard you say earlier that it is the building owner's or manager's responsibility to make sure that RPZ or backflow preventer is actually working properly. So hypothetically, and this may be a question that's really addressed to you. So I'm a building owner. I've had my backflow preventer inspected. It passed inspection. And 3 months later, something worked its way into the system. How do you know, and what kind of a liability as a building owner or manager am I facing, even though I went and had that inspected and it passed?
I think that's a very good question. You don't know what's hidden beneath the eyes where you can't see what's going on. It's a very, very possible once we leave after a test that passes, something will enter that device and cause it to fail. Luckily, there are multiple check valves on these devices. So the first valve that would be affected would be the first check, because that's closest to the main. However, the backflow is prevented initially by that second check. So you have double protection there. It's not just a single check failed, you have two valves that are going to protect you. We don't see that happen very often, not at all, as a matter of fact. And if you have an RPZ, you even have a third valve. So that can generally get you very safely through a 12-month period of time where you really don't have to be very, very concerned. But from a legal standpoint, I think that's a very good question, and perhaps Jay, you'd like
I
to.
don't think anything can ever be perfect like that. So if someone has performed the test with due diligence and seems to be okay, I don't know that you would be able to fault the company that did the checking. You know, there'd be a lot of questions. In other words, these stopgap measures, maybe one of them failed. You know, so you'd have to look at the particular circumstances. You know, as opposed to if someone put down, yes, I checked it, and they didn't really check it, like it wasn't really tested.
Okay. Now, New York City requires annual inspection of all secondary backflow prevention devices, which are internal building, like boiler RPZ or washing machine vacuum breakers. Where the annual inspection should be filed with Department of Buildings?
Well, it doesn't have to be filed anywhere. It must be tested. As I said, an OP129 is a DOB form, not a DEP form. That must be filled out by the certified tester and the master plumber.
Okay, Dave, can you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. The OP129, that is the test form for DOB, that needs to be completed by the MLP and the certified tester, but it doesn't have to go anywhere unless you're actually changing out the device because it needs to be repaired or it needs to be replaced. And that form must be maintained in the building so that if a DOB inspector comes, they can actually have access to the records that you did test.
So it should be readily available upon request by the building department?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now, if you do change or swap out the device, then that OP129 must go to DOB. They have to review it so they can update their records and show that there's a new device with a new serial number, and then you're in great shape.
So basically, any building in New York City have to have a list of all internal secondary backflow prevention devices.
Yes.
By now.
Yes.
And they should have to have a record of testing.
That's correct. We provide our clients with a book, with a binder actually, so that they have those records at their fingertips and they can be produced when needed.
So another question is then each building must have, or maintenance personnel go throughout the building and record all the location of all the backflow prevention devices.
And work with the contractor to make sure they get tested properly. Cooling towers, laundry rooms, etc. Yes.
And one more question comes to my mind with the cooling towers. Now the plumbing code requires that cooling tower should not be drained in a storm system. It should be drained in a sanitary system. Right? So how usually the cooling tower has a drain right above the roof. And if they need to drain for winterizing the cooling tower and drain it on the roof, it will run off into the stormwater system.
And that's what we generally see. That's exactly what we'll see, especially on high-rise buildings in the city. We see that all the time.
So maybe, George, how we approach this requirement of the code that cooling tower should drain into sanitary piping? How we do this on the roof?
You would have to install a drain that's connected to the sanitary. You'd have to go to the floor below and install a new floor drain. But I haven't seen that that's going to be a retroactive requirement as yet.
So it's basically not a requirement to change whatever is in existing, only when new installation?
If you're doing a new tower, then you would have to accommodate that in your design.
And design to flow into sanitary.
Right, you'd have to show it to flow into the sanitary.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, concerns, issues? Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. George, I think you had, and if you could also address fuel lines and.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that was more for plumbing, but I'll do a fuel line. I have an oil burner license also. There's a lot of work that your oil burner installer can do that can be self-certified. Replacement of oil lines, conversion from 6 to 4, that's over, 4 to 2 oil, certain other things, installation of an oil tank, generator piping. A lot of that work could be self-certified, and certain boilers could be self-certified by the oil burner installer, similar in the way that the plumber does. But for the most part, the inspections are going to be field inspections with the oil division. And if it's oil work, there'll be a card. It's a 16A card that you sign off. And if you're doing any kind of boiler work, they don't have a per se boiler card anymore, but something that's similar that'll be printed off the screen. Just while we're on all that subject too, right now, your contractor to show you a job was signed off or an inspection was passed. He's going to have to maybe either get a screenshot or delegate you to the job, because what I can see on a record that I'm part of is different from what somebody in the public could see. The public doesn't have the same transparency that Biz had. Biz, you could go on, look at your building, see the inspection schedule, see the results. Inspection ready, it doesn't have that same capability. For that reason alone, you might want to get delegated on when you have a job so you can follow along. If you're delegated, anytime that I request an inspection, certify anything, you would also get an email, so you would know everything that's going on in your job, and you could track it along and see the approvals. So everybody's used to going to Biz, looking for gas authorization. You see a little gas authorized. It's similar in inspection ready, but it's a little different. And you would also know when your job was signed off, you'd see the X, PLX, the FB permit would be X'd out also. Does that answer your question? I have some more stuff. So,
Yeah, by all means. Okay.
Margie wanted me to talk a little more, and there's some very important legislation that's being introduced next week, the 12th, at City Council, all relating to gas. Anybody aware of any of that legislation? Everybody heard of it? Okay. This is all stemming from the 2nd Avenue explosion. The City Council, over the past year, has been trying to come up with ways how to make things safer. So they've proposed 10 bills. They've already been introduced. They're going to have speak about them on the 12th now. Some of the bills are dealing with utilities, how the utilities going to have to provide a report on an annual basis of their infrastructure. One is going to require you as a building manager to give your tenant, along with their lease, a plan, a gas emergency plan, for lack of a better term. I guess they'll define it once it goes into legislation, so that your tenant's going to have to know what procedures they should follow in the event of a gas leak. One of the bills is going to require you, in addition to your CO alarm, to install a gas leak detector alarm. So it's going to be similar in Article 3 of the code, where you have your CO detector. It's going to, that's a proposal. One proposal is simply to start a committee to study these issues about why there's problems with gas. One proposed bill is going to be an amnesty bill. What they'll allow you to do as an owner, if you have any gas appliances in your building that weren't properly filed or properly inspected, without civil penalty, will allow you to either get a permit, reactivate the permit that the appliance was originally installed under, and then conduct all the inspections to close it out. So that's one of the bills. That's an amnesty bill. A couple more bills. There's a bill that I remember the numbers on. It's 1079. 1079 was a bill that was going to relate to a licensee. If a licensee got in trouble for doing work without a permit related to gas, they were going to lose certain privileges. The bill, unfortunately, they didn't have the terminology right. So what the industry's done is we decided to take it one step better, and we're going to request from the City Council that moving forward, that on gas test and gas roughing inspections, that's just the visual of the pipe and the pressure test, that they cannot be self-certified any longer. Only an actual DOB inspector would be able to conduct the test. And the reason we did this is, even though the spot check rate is 20% and there's an audit rate, it still leaves a chance that something could be installed by an unqualified person and it wouldn't be seen. That's 2nd Avenue was alleged that that wasn't a plumber that did the work, it was just an unqualified individual. So nobody really ever saw that work because the cover-up plumber did self-certification. So nobody actually saw the work. Maybe if an inspector did see that work when it went in and he noticed that it was not code compliant or just not professional, he might have been able to make a recommendation and perhaps prevented that incident. So that's a big privilege for us. But the industry is willing to give it up so that every job, 100% of every job, an inspector is going to see the pipe and he's going to see the pressure test. So everyone's going to know that that's 100% code compliant and 100% that it passed the test.
George?
Yes.
So, How was the Second Avenue work self-certified? There has to have been a plumber in the mix then, right? Was it a plumber who self-certified?
A plumber, okay, alleged, because it's got to go to trial. There
Right.
was a contractor who did all the work, and he had a plumber just sign for him. They call it covering. So the contractor did the work, unqualified individual, and the plumber just self-certified. So
Oh, I see. So
No-
it's the contractor who did the work and a
Yes.
plumber just rubber stamped it?
yes, that's what's alleged
Okay.
that happened there. So nobody saw that job from the Department of Buildings. So that was a problem. About 2014, federal government, they're the ones that are in charge of gas pipe all the way up into your meter. They make the rules. There was a problem because throughout the country, the different, we have Public Service Commission that governs it, gas throughout the state, up to your meter. They wanted everybody to tighten up and have the same definition of meter pipe. What that meant was Con Ed and National Grid, they kind of stop at your head of service valve. What the federal rule is that the gas meter outlet, at the outlet of your meter, that's actually where the gas service pipe ends. They wanted the utility to adopt that definition, which was no big deal. But the big deal part came after. The government requires the utilities to do periodic inspections of that piping. And what that was going to mean is that on a certain period of time, the utility was going to have to come in, do a visual corrosion inspection, and also use GMI, which is gas measurement indicator, which measures parts per million of gas and volume of air, and go through your building from the head of service valve to your meter, all exposed piping. Now, we all know there's thousands of meters that are up in the apartments. So every place they would have to go, they would have to do all of this work. If they found a leak or corrosion, they'd have to report it and in case of emergency, shut you down. So this was something that's been in the works for a couple of years. What the utilities did was they reached out to the industry, and both my associations, the Plumbing Foundation and the Master Plumbers Council, we went and we met with Public Service Commission, because there was going to be a huge problem with this. The federal rule only allowed people to work on gas piping that were operator qualified and drug and alcohol tested. So we were able to have dialogue with the Public Service Commission and convince them that in New York City, licensed plumbers and our employees working on our direct and continuing supervision for the past 60 years on any job that my men, licensed plumber installed, inspected by the DOB, and energized by utility operators, there's never been an incident, not a one. They could not find a one. We showed them our qualifications, what we do, and our code, and how everything works. And the Public Service Commission agreed. They said, you know what, plumbers can still do this work without any additional operator qualification. And that was huge, because as owners, what that would have meant for you, when you had a shutdown, the pipe up into your meter would have had to been done by either utility or somebody that was operator qualified working for the utility. So that would have really meant that it would take forever to get gas back on in your building. So we worked that out, and now we're working hand in hand with the utility to develop a program where we would be able to come in and help them do these inspections. In the interim, Second Avenue occurred, and the City Council got involved, and they knew about this bill, but they're like, you know what, why are we only testing up to the meter? If the meter's in the basement, we're leaving a whole vast expanse of the building not being inspected. And that's the intro they put in 1088. Intro 1088 would require, in other than 1 and 2 family houses, periodic inspection of gas piping. That inspection would encompass from your service head valve, all the exposed piping within the building. And it would be the same thing, a visual inspection and use of a combustion gas indicator, which is a little not as sensitive as what the utility has to require. So this bill was proposed by the City Council, and it could have an effect on you, because periodically, I think it's going to be every 4 years it was proposed, that, they have to hire a plumber, come in and conduct this inspection. So the city would have to work that out. It probably would go right into Article 3, which is where your boiler inspections are. I think boiler inspections are 317, 303 is boiler inspections. So it would be similarly, you would have to come out, send a form in. If you had any defects, they'd be noted, you would have to correct them. And in a case of an emergency, you would have to be shut down. My association, both associations, we studied it, and both associations are in favor of this bill, provided that we would have the ability to work with the utility and have a plan going in. In other words, if we're going to do an inspection in your building and there's the possibility you could be shut down if there's a leak, that we would have the ability to maybe fix a leak without shutting the whole building off, which is sometimes too often the case now. Because when the utility comes in, there's 3 levels of tags, well, for a better word, they'll call you. They have an A tag, a B tag, and a C tag. An A tag is an emergency, and they got to shut you down and lock you off. That's a leak that can't be fixed. You have a B tag, that can be something that they can isolate, and they don't necessarily lock your meter or shut you down. And they have a C tag, which is an appliance, which if you have a bad appliance, a stove, they could just shut the stove off, and you'll have the ability to replace it. You'll have to call in the plumber, and then he'll have to file paperwork with the utility and do certain inspections and pull a permit from the DOB for testing, and then they could get you back on. But there's, they do have some technology now. If it's a small leak, they might be able to bag it or wrap it, and then they have that has to be repaired in 5 days. They have, it's all in their code, how they have to operate. They'll check it every 5 days. You'll have 5 days to hire a plumber to make the repair, and we want to sit down with them so that we can work this out, because it's really not good for anybody when a building's shut down. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to get it on, and it's not the pipe that's really the hard part. It's going through people's kitchen, people's living spaces. There's a lot of prohibited locations for gas piping right now, which is something that we're working on as an industry too in the next code revision. So these are some of the bills. It's very important for you because they'll definitely affect you. Does anybody have any questions on them?
Okay, Alex, and then I do, George. Alex and Steve, I think you have, okay.
Okay, I would like to just, George, ask you about, to clarify, the Canadian Yellow Pages states that they are responsible only for the gas piping up to the property line, even though you can go through the front yard if you have, maybe you don't have a front yard, and you come into the building and you put a head valve, but Canadian states that they are responsibility only to the property line. And then second, that 3 valves, if they are operated, the Canadian has to be informed about this. This curb valve, head valve, and meter valve. These 3 valves, if anyone would consider to operate them, they would first have to call the utility company.
Okay, that's true. Just so you know, anytime that gas has to be shut off, the owner or their agent has to notify the utility if you need to shut off. In an emergency, anyone could shut a valve. Only the utility is authorized to turn it back on. And there's another bill that deals with that, unauthorized use. It's going to be considered a hazardous violation. Right now with the DOB, any violations that have to do with gas, they're hazardous one. So there's the maximum penalty, which is generally like $5,000, but I've seen a few that were like $24,000, $25,000, which is the cap on it. And he brought up a point where Con Ed, economically, they were only responsible to the property line. Even though it's their pipe coming in the building, and really, technically, they're responsible if your meter's in the apartment on the 20th floor, that falls under their purview, but the owner's responsibility for maintenance and any kind of replacements for that pipe. Sure.
You mentioned fuel oil. The new New York State, federal New York State regulation about underground about underground storage tank facilities. They require operators, Class A, Class B, Class C operators, and facilities should be compliant by October 13. I just would like to know if underground fuel oil storage should be also compliant with this. Because the fuel oil storage tanks above 1,100 gallons, they are registered with the New York State. The tanks are registered with the bulk storage program. And in my understanding that means that the state regulates these underground storage tanks. And if anyone aware of requirement to comply with the underground storage tank facilities for having operators Class A, Class B, and Class C.
Okay, that's a little bit out of my subject matter right now, because that's DEC, if that's a state requirement. But under the New York City code, the mechanical code, I could do that work, as far as the piping to it.
Actually, this is not about the work, it's a facility operation. So this about the facility having
So
an
the owner would
operator.
have to have some person on staff that had that qualification then?
Yes, and the operator must be state certified. Class A and Class B operators must be state, Class A and Class B operators, facility operators should take New York State exam online. A Class C operator can be trained by Class A or Class B operator. And the qualification can be just by evaluation of the Class C operator. All the three Class A, Class B, and Class C operators could be the same person as long as he's qualified. But this is not about installation. This is about maintenance and keep facility complying with the state and federal regulations. So my question is about this. The New York City is now in the process of, New York City facilities now in the process of getting in compliance with the new underground storage tank facility requirements. I am not sure if this underground storage tank for diesel fuel and gasoline, they get in compliance. And some chemical tanks also, underground chemical tanks, 100 gallons and more underground installation must be in compliance with new USD regulations. Just I'm not sure if any facility which has fuel oil for heating fuel oil, 1,100 gallons or more, which are registered with bulk storage program, they are registered. And if these facilities, if the owners must have on record Class A, Class B, and Class C operator for these tanks. So that would be just a question in general, if anyone aware of it.
Well, that's an excellent question, Alex, because we're talking about the handymen, we're talking about the porters that a superintendent might delegate this responsibility to. So,
Yes, somebody who already operates underground storage tank in a building has to find out if the tank is registered with the state. He must find out if this facility must have operator A, B, Class A, Class B, and Class C. If they call the state, and if they have to comply, so they have to comply by October 13.
October 13th. Okay, so you know for sure it's the diesel and the gasoline, but you're not certain about the heating fuel. And so underground, you're not just talking about subground, so it could be above ground where you can see every angle of it, but something that's actually buried. So it's the buried tank, not necessarily the buried fuel line?
Yes, the underground, I think it's more than 12-inch below the ground. And even if you have underground, but it's in a vault, it's not considered underground. Mm-hmm. If it's underground, but it has a room,
right.
So it's not underground.
Okay.
It's only if surrounded by soil, or it is, I believe it's 12-inch below the ground. Okay. It starts considering that it's underground because it has contact with earth and corrosion, and for that purposes. But I'm pretty sure that even fuel oil fuel oil tanks, heating fuel oil tanks, they are registered with the state.
Yes,
and
they are.
So they are regulated.
Yes.
So I just want to...
Okay, well, we're going to find out.
Yeah, want that facilities will have to find out, call the New York State if they have to comply. Because October 13 is compliance date. And I know that New York City agencies now working on getting into compliance. So I don't know if like multiple dwellings, they have underground storage tanks. And I just want them to, facility managers, to find out if they need to comply with this new rule for having Class A, Class B, and C operator.
Well, it's very important.
Thank you.
Definitely will find out. Thank you. And so, George, I have a question for you. Getting back to the shutdowns when there's a problem with gas lines. Now, everyone in this room, I'm sure, is familiar with the fear when your building gets shut down and every stove then has to be pulled and relit. and that's low pressure natural gas. But with all the high pressure natural gas that we've got in the city now, and I have not heard of a building who is shut down because of a fear of a high pressure leak somewhere leading up to it. And so, for example, yesterday afternoon, up on 77th Street and York Avenue or First Avenue, there was a suspected gas main leak, and they were shutting down traffic from the area, and they were about to evacuate the entire block. And I don't know if it was low pressure or high pressure, but is there any sense that you get that we could be seeing these kind of shutdowns to a building if there's a fear, because it's readily done with the low pressure? So has there been any conversation about that or any sense?
No, the only time they're going to shut you down is if there's a leak. High pressure isn't going to have any more of a tendency to leak than low pressure.
Okay.
It's some of the older jobs, and I know it's a pain in the neck, but sometimes you have to look at it as a relief, because when we get in these buildings and then we see where people put meters inside of kitchen cabinets and there's no air, it's just lucky that nothing bad has happened. The high pressure jobs, what they're trying to do now is anytime they can, they're putting the regulators outside. So the only thing that's going to be coming into the building is low pressure. That's what they're trying to do. Make sure you don't put stuff on top of the regulators, garbage and storage. The job at the high pressure at Con Edison National Grid, it's been thoroughly inspected. The regulators are properly vented. They're checking to make sure there's relief air in the meter room, so if there is a leak, there's enough fresh air that the leak would go outside. You could periodically check it. You can have your maintenance guy, go by, check it. But you want to stay away from, sometimes people spray it to check for leaks. If you're using a corrosive, like dish detergent or something like that, if you want to do it, go to the plumbing supply house, buy non-corrosive spray, because that corrosive spray, from repeatedly spraying it, it will wear down, actually create a leak and cause corrosion on the piping. But generally, gas is very safe. If it's put in by a licensed plumber with their employees, inspected by the Department of Buildings, and the utilities turn it on, it's safe. Over time, things can happen. Things could fail, regulator could fail, but there's safeties all in place for that.
Okay. Okay, yes, we have a question here.
What should we do if, as a property manager, to avoid any kind of leak, like a preventive maintenance? If I want to go and check out each and every apartment for is there any gas leak, what should we do?
Well, there's really no preventive maintenance. What you could look for, if you go through your building and you see that the pipe goes through a wall and there's no sleeves, then I would suggest you buy the non-corrosive leak and spray around the wall, because what's going to happen over time is the pipe in contact with concrete is going to corrode. Could it be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, but it could be a problem over time. When you go in any apartments, the flex connector shouldn't be the old brass type, it should be the new modern type, because the brass type can crack, if it's moved, and you have a lot of old apartments that you haven't been in there. You could spray the pipe behind the stove. Generally, all you're going to see is the valve right behind the stove, and you could check that if you're in the apartment. And that's part of what the Public Service is looking at, a proposal. They're trying to see if the utilities and plumbers could take this a step further, that every time we're in an apartment, we would conduct a leak inspection. I don't know if there's anything that's going to come out of that.
My perspective is basically like hiring a plumber and trying to test everything. Because we have two of the buildings shut down, and after that I was thinking, can there be a higher licensed plumber to check without utility shutting down the whole building, and try to test each and every apartment?
Well, yeah, now there's two things. The word test. Test means you're adding pressure, and you don't really want to do that because gas exists at about a quarter-pound pressure at the most. The city test pressure is 3 pounds. When you introduce 3 pounds into a line that's used to having only a quarter pound, you could create leaks. Okay, so you want to avoid doing that. And if you want to test, you need to get a permit from the Department of Buildings to do that. You could do a visual inspection, and you could spray it down, and you'd be okay, as long as it's non-corrosive leak detector solution. It's like $30 for a bottle, about this big. That's something that, anybody could do. As far as what corrosion is, basically, You have to actually go to school to get qualified to do this, and they show you different cards and the different levels of corrosion. That's all that's really involved in that. But if you see pipes going through a wall, there's no sleeve, that's a potential point. You want to, everybody has meters in their hallway, and then people are going by with all lumber and everything. You want to just make sure that somebody doesn't rip your meters down. Know where your service head valve is. If an emergency, you could always shut it off. But gas is very, very safe. The problem that occurred on 2nd Avenue was an unqualified individual that was just put greed ahead of everybody else, and had an open connection, and as a result, that's bad. But you know, normally gas is very, very safe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, microphone, sorry. Angelica, if you could bring it. Hold it, no, sir, just, it doesn't go into the video if you shout.
Isn't the level of odorant that they put in so high that it's really a good first line of defense? Like,
Yes.
You shouldn't suspect a leak unless you smell something.
If you smell it, you'll generally smell it, but you could have a small leak and not smell it, because it might not, if the odor doesn't travel to you, you wouldn't notice it. But generally, that's why the odor, and it's added in, so you would smell it right away.
Okay.
One thing I would just like to, everybody wants to buy the combustion gas leak indicator from Amazon.com for $199. Okay, you get a lot of false positives from that. First of all, if we move forward with this, I'm anticipating that my men are going to have to become operator qualified for that. They're going to have to learn exactly how to use it. It's got to be calibrated. The utilities have this calibrated every 30 days. So if you're really not trained on how to use it and it's not really calibrated and you can't recognize a false positive, once you have that thing, you're going to have leaks all over the place. If you want to buy it, fine, use that as a first level, but then have your leak indicator, because if you spray something and it doesn't bubble, it's not leaking.
Yes, Alex.
I would like just to add to safety of gas piping. And so if you, after listening to this great presentation by George, and we have more presenters here, you know, and you want to check your gas piping, so I advise invite a licensed plumber, and he will check for you all the piping if you are concerned about it, and he will check not or just go visual inspection. He may find that you have improper fittings, and he may recommend that you put proper fittings in, and some other things which normally maintenance people may not, they will look at it, they will not recognize it as a problem. Second, do not test your gas piping for leaks with open flame, okay? But it happens, some plumbers are confident that, you know, they can do it because they don't smell, they just check it shouldn't leak, so he is okay with it, but don't do it with open flame. If you smell gas leak, do not call anyone from your cell phone, because it can be an explosion. So the first thing when you smell gas, you get out of the building and then inform your management and utility company. But do not call right there you smell the leak, because it has electrical connections in your iPhone, in the phone, and it may trigger an explosion. Do not use any electrical devices. Some automatic switches, thermostats or refrigerator, they also may cause an explosion. So any electrical devices should not be operated, no switches, don't leave the room where you smell gas, and don't turn off the light because of energy efficiency, you know, because it can be, has also explosion. So first thing, you get out of the building and then try to save people's lives. Because if you do that in a building, you may not help anyone, and yourself too. Okay, so as George stated, gas is safe, but there are certain rules which should be followed, and which you all keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And for the audience, Alex Weiss is a professional engineer, and he teaches much of this right here at the Mechanics Institute. So Thank you, Alex. George, I have a question, but CJ, I want you to think about a question I have after George. We've used the word emergency here. Something's okay if it's an emergency. And years back, as a property manager, you know, we always tried to find the wiggle room in what the word emergency really means. So if you can think about, you know, when you're standing in front of a judge, well, you know, it was an emergency, so we went in the apartment, or it was an emergency and I did that kind of thing. So I'd like to hear a little about that. Now, George, you've talked a lot about certain levels of work by certain qualified people, but especially in the larger complexes where there's a large maintenance crew and they do a lot of the work themselves. Now, 32BJ, the school, even here, the Mechanics Institute, they're teaching plumbing. And, you know, I remember as a property manager, staff would say, oh, I can work on 4-inch pipe, and I can work on 2-inch pipe, and I can work on all this. And so they may have the ability. And 32BJ teaches a lot, so one thinks, well, it is okay. And then the understanding from a business standpoint was, well, if they're a direct employee of the owner, somehow they can do more than if they weren't a direct employee. And so the plumbing work that can legitimately, according to the building department, be done by building staff. What's your take on that?
What you had just said, it's ordinary repair only. If you're going to change a sink or you're going to change a toilet, that's it. That's all your super can do legally. He cannot do any other work. Unfortunately, it's a problem. I know some buildings have a bigger shop than I have. They have more pipe. Maybe they work for a plumber for 2 years. That still makes them unqualified individuals. If anything happens, you're using an unqualified individual. I really suggest that you read the indictment that they wrote for those people on 2nd Avenue, for the owners. And I think the district attorney's mood moving forward is, I mean, you could pretty much do anything you want in New York City. It's only when a problem happens. So if you make a fire and you kill somebody and it was your super, or he does bad drain piping, or he does something with the gas piping, you would expect that it's going to come back to the board and to you. And that's what we're telling plumbers right now. You have to be very careful what you do. You have to stay code compliant, get the right permit. Don't do anything that's outside of the code, because if something happens, it's going to be considered that it was willful. All right? So your super's not trained to do drain piping. They're not trained to do water piping, and they're not qualified. What makes my employees qualified is they're working for me in my direct and continuing supervision. That I watch them and I'm responsible. That's the level.
Okay, so the definition of qualified, it's qualifications. You know, some people mistake, well, I can do it. I might have even been trained for it, but if you don't have the qualifications, then you are not qualified.
Right. My men are not per se plumbers. They're journeyman and apprentice. I'm the plumber. I'm the licensed plumber. That's what makes me a plumber. So there's no such thing as an unlicensed plumber, really. It's an unqualified individual. That, you know, and it's, it could be a problem.
Okay.
Everything in our code is moving towards smaller, like years past, you can only get a couple of water closets into a 3-inch pipe. Now you can get sometimes 6 to 8. So everything is getting tighter to make it more efficient, but that also means that you have to really pay attention a lot more to how you're doing the installations. Water flow is down, toilets are down now. The flows in shower heads. So you have to be cognizant of what you're doing on an existing system. Very, very important.
Okay, so running piping behind the wall. So you're saying it's really what's outside the wall? It's if you're running.
No, it doesn't matter where the pipe is. The only person that's supposed to be doing the work is the licensed plumber.
Okay.
Whether it's inside the wall, outside the wall, it really doesn't have any bearing on it.
So the building staff or an unqualified person, no matter what their legal status is, an unqualified person can install fixtures, but
replace fixtures.
Replace.
You can replace. If you shut the 2 valves, take the sink off the wall, put the sink back on, as long as you don't go inside the wall. And as you can see, the process escalates. You don't need a permit to do the sink, but if the valve broke or the pipe broke in the wall, then you could go to that other form, which is not a permit but a report. Then if you go past that, you're into a permit. The problem is when your super starts, if something breaks, does he stop? Does he know to stop? Does he know to call you? What's going to happen if he breaks a valve? It could cause a flood. Or if a drain line, we go in, we see vent lines that are too low, and then you're not getting the proper venting. And venting's key to getting all of the germs out into the atmosphere, not to have them come back into an apartment or somewhere else in the building.
I want to ask George a question to sort of follow up on what you're talking about, because I'm seeing what I think is a new trend where buildings are now seeing a lot of these ordinary repairs as a cost opportunity, to make money. So they're charging the shareholders for lots of these ordinary repairs, and they're doing things involving toilets and stuff like that, that maybe in the past would go to plumbers, but now it's the staff and they're getting paid $200 for whatever. What do you think about that stuff?
Well, my personal opinion and professional opinion, I'll just give you the professional one. It's not legal. It's not code compliant.
That's how I feel. But I mean, I see more and more of a trend that buildings are making money from doing this.
Let me ask you, you're a lawyer, you advise a board. What if somebody dies from germs, let's just say, and it's a very real possibility? Now, does the board still protect it, or they lose their insurance protection? Is it pierced because they did something wrong, that they'd be personally liable? I don't know. If they do, then that's something that they would want to consider.
Yeah, I'm commenting to the group because we have probably a lot of property managers here. I'm seeing more and more of this as a way for buildings to make extra money.
Question.
Yes.
I'm Nissan from Ashokan Water Services. What about something like an oven or that's hooked up to a gas line? What qualifications would the staff, would the management need to
Here's the
replace
problem
that?
with stoves.
Thank you.
In the 2014 code, they modified the OP 128, the ordinary work, to include the replacement of a gas flex. The DOB's position on a stove is that only a plumber is supposed to install it, but they're not requiring a permit for it. And we're trying to push that you do need at least a permit or to go on this form. Because the most dangerous thing you could do is install a stove, and I'll tell you why. Your pipe could be 100% up to that valve, but that little flex connector, you really need to know how to put it together, especially with 2 wrenches. And if you don't, that could cause an explosion. 2 of the biggest explosions prior to 2nd Avenue were at that point. Restoration, Con Edison gassed out, didn't get an apartment, a guy came home, tried to do it himself, and I think killed himself and his son, and blew himself right out of the building. So that is one of the most dangerous things you could do, a stove or a residential dryer that's not hard piped. Put in that flex connector, knowing how to purge it properly. Unfortunately, the DOP is not requiring a permit for it. They say a plumber has to do it, but you all know, why would you call me to do work if it's not required to be done?
And that would include new installation or replacement, right?
Well, a new installation, you need a plumber to put the gas pipe.
All right.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a good point because, as you say, the building department does not require filing because you have the valve, the existing valve, you're not touching the valve, but the attachment is not properly attached. That is a problem. Now, also the building code in the plumbing code in some sections says that multiple hoses, flexible, they should have. They should be inspected by a special inspector. But I called the building department and they said that even a single connection must be inspected by a special inspector. Do you know about that?
The ones you're talking about are seismic. They're not conventional connectors like you would have in a commercial kitchen. What he's talking about is the special connectors. There's a lot of jobs now that they have seismic requirements, and they'll have a special connector that's generally flanged, and that would have a special inspector. But for a commercial kitchen, which could have a 2-inch stainless steel connector, or a residential stove, there's no requirement for a special inspector.
Okay, thank you.
As long as you're talking commercial stoves, a lot of stoves are on wheels and removable and have a 3 or 4 foot long flex line. If somebody wanted to replace that because the nylon sheath had gotten damaged and all you want to do is replace that flex line, Are you saying that they have to get a plumber to do that? I know you're not saying it's required, but are you recommending that for somebody that does stove service?
That's a different story. We're in a commercial kitchen, and it's not what I'm saying, it's what the code says. The code says, yes, you would have to hire a plumber to pull a permit to do that, but it's not a big deal. He could shut the valve and change it. And I realize that it's not happening, your kitchen repair guy's doing it. And again, nothing's a problem until it's a problem. And you know how it works. One guy wants $25, one guy wants $20, the other guy comes in at 10, you say, hey, let's take a shot. And it's fine, as long as nothing ever happens. But, and that was a very frustrating part as they were putting that case together, like, you know, who are we gonna get, how are we gonna get him? And so if you are doing something and you do it for cost or anything like that, it could be a problem. You know, you just have to consider that in everything. Even with fire safety, we go in a lot of places where a fire department will issue a forthwith violation. Why? You have no fire protection, and then people just sit on it for a day, a week, a month. You know, and if something happens and there's no fire protection in a building you manage, it's going to be a problem.
Thank you.
Any more?
Okay, thank you.
Can you replace a domestic water booster skid under an LAA Cat 2?
Yes. There's a whole list. We developed a fixture and appliance list of what can be done on an LAA and how it would be filed. It's going to be published soon by the Department of Buildings. That should be on it. It should be Category 2 because you're replacing it. If I was the plumber, I would probably do it as a manual application so they'll see it versus through electronic filing, but it's something that it falls into the category of a Category 2. It's unlimited cost, you pay the full fee. So even if it's a $50,000 job, you'd pay the fees based on $50,000.
I just want to ask this, even though we've kind of already touched on it, because it comes up in so many renovations. When you have a renovation and they're putting in a new toilet where the old one was, they're putting in a new sink where the old one was, no permits needed for that? Or is there?
If you're not touching the bend under the floor, and you're not touching the trap, and you're not touching the valves, you would not need a permit for that based on the code.
Okay. Because that's a very common occurrence.
Just one thing I do see if you're doing alterations, I see a lot of times where people are taking a tub out and putting a shower in, and the plumber's filing that on the limited alteration application, and that permit doesn't provide for any construction work. Now, it's impossible to take a tub out and put a shower in without doing construction work, so you would need to have an architect to do that. And that's some things where you could have a problem if the job is audited, where then they could come back and say, all right, listen, you give you a violation, you exceeded the scope of the work.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to touch on this, when you need a permit, when you don't need a permit. My understanding of construction code is that if you do an alteration in the apartment, then you have to show all the work. Even if you're replacing a fixture, which would not require filing. But if you do renovation of apartment, then that's what I say. My understanding is that all the work must be shown. You
could show the work, but you wouldn't necessarily need a permit to do that. But often, he's bringing up a point, is a good point. Quite often, somebody will get architectural design, forget to put the plumbing on it. So once your O2 is issued, you can't add a work type. You would have an OT work type for the construction. You can't go back and add a PL type. So you have two options. Either you got to hire an engineer, pay the full engineering and architecture fee again, or a plumber would have the ability, if it falls within the allowance, to file an LAA manually. They would reference in conjunction with the other job, and then they could do the plumbing work that way. As far as what he's saying, if you're doing the plan, you got to show all the work. But if what you said, if you're just simply replacing it, you wouldn't need to have a plumbing permit for that. That's an ordinary repair.
Okay. We have a few more short presentations. Any other questions for George at this moment? Okay, George, that was fabulous. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.